As the sun rises over the golden dunes, the Black Pharaohs entertain their guests with whimsical tales and theatrical performances. The royal court reverberates with a peal of mirth, while the majestic Nile, like a river of laughter, carries their jubilant spirits throughout the land. The history of the Sudan unfolds like a captivating tapestry, with its roots firmly embedded in the ancient Nubian Kingdom out of the famed land of the bow. Emerging around 3500 BC, the Nubian Kingdom, also known as the Kush for centuries, thrived along the Nile River in what is present-day Sudan and a part of southern Egypt. Renowned for their ancient and advanced civilization and mastery of trade, the Nubians left an indelible mark on Sudan's history. Welcome to another episode of Syria Afrobeats, where I will explore uncut and factual history as well as the geopolitics in Africa. Brace yourselves, history buffs, as this will be a long episode. By the way, you can actually skip to any chapter of your choice as I have arranged them in a chronological order. Now, let's explore Nubia's geography during the reign of the Black Pharaohs. Nubia stretched from today's southern Egypt to northern Sudan. So this episode focuses on Sudan, not to be confused with southern Sudan, which seceded in 2011. In the 25th dynasty of Egypt, the Kushite Empire ruled Egypt. This is where the controversy of the Black Pharaohs of Egypt reigns. Well, I won't get into the details because it's quite a rabbit hole. In a nutshell though, the Black Pharaohs ruled a combined Egyptian-Nubian empire in the 8th century BCE for close to a century. This region extended from the Mediterranean Sea to the confluence of the Blue and White Niles, which is in present-day Khartoum. The Napatan dynasty architectural wonders, particularly the pyramids of Nuri and Gebel Barkal, stand today as testaments to the pharaohs' grandeur and splendor. Before further diving into the history of the Sudan during the height of the Roman Empire, let me fill you in on the brutal conflict happening in Khartoum in Sudan as we speak today. So what exactly is happening in Khartoum? Life in Sudan's capital Khartoum and in many parts of the country has taken a sudden but very dramatic turn for the worse. Fighting has rocked Khartoum and adjoining areas as well as Darfur, a region that has been at war since 2003. The current fight is between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces. It's also a paramilitary force, and it is centered on two leaders, Dagalo and Al-Burhan. So what exactly are the leaders of these two military organizations up to? How does the after effects of the 30-year-long reign of the dictator Omar al-Bashir play out in the current conflict, and what exactly is the war about? But first, the background. You see, the people of Sudan have fought for decades to dethrone Omar al-Bashir government. He was finally ousted on 11th of April 2019 at the hands of two generals who combined forces to overthrow al-Bashir's government. You see, in Kiswahili we say, alimai mtama havuni kunde, which loosely translates to the one who cultivates millet does not harvest beans. So basically al-Bashir got what he deserved. However, the Sudanese government, the Sudanese people who were hoping for a civilian administration, now find themselves amid a power struggle between former military friends turned foes. Life in Sudan's capital Khartoum and in many parts of the country have taken quite a dramatic turn for the worse as we speak this week. So, who are the warring parties in this conflict? At the heart of the crisis are two military strongmen. Following the 2019 military coup d'etat, a power-sharing agreement was reached between this guy, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan of the Sudanese army, and the General Hamdan Dagalo, commonly known as Hemedti among his people, who is the head of a paramilitary organization known as the Rapid Support Forces. For simplicity purposes, I'll refer to the two generals as Al-Burhan and Dagalo. Both military men historically collaborated in many capacities. They played key roles in the counter-insurgency against Darfur rebels in the civil war in Sudan's western region that began in 2003. Besides, in 2015, both worked in Yemen when fighting for the Saudis against the Iran-backed Houthi rebels. Ultimately, they joined forces and carried out the coup against al-Bashir, and then they executed another military junta in 2021 to eject the civilian government who was supposed to form the transitional administration. The end of 2019 brought a power-sharing agreement which was reached between the TSC, or the transitional government at the time, and various opposition groups, marking a significant step towards a democratic government. However, this did not last as seen in the events happening today in Khartoum. As we speak, the war has already killed hundreds of people, with millions fleeing Khartoum and millions more remaining trapped in urban areas, sheltering from gunfire, explosions, and looters. By the way, while recording this episode, Saudi Arabia hosted 2 generals in Jeddah, a city located in Saudi Arabia's Red Sea coastal plain. The talks between the 2 strongmen are underway. The goal is to secure a humanitarian truce. As for now, it's a matter of waiting and seeing. But we surely hope that the peace talks bear fruit for the sake of the Sudan. More on the deadly Sudan conflict in the final part of this episode. Now that we have covered a bit of the current Sudan history, let's backdate to the 1st century Nubia. Ooh, the exciting part. What was Nubia like during the Roman Empire times? In the 1st century BC, enters Augustus Caesar and his mighty army that had conquered a territory that stretched from the Middle East to northern Britain and from Egypt to Germany. Egypt, as it had been known for thousands of years, lies in ashes and ruins, with the Cleopatra lying dead behind. Cleopatra was a legendary queen of Egypt who ruled the kingdom from 51 BCE to 30 BCE. In this case, BCE, I mean before Common Era. She is often best known for a dramatic suicide, allegedly for the fatal bite of a venomous snake. Away from the riches of Nubia, which included gold, silver, and ivory, the Roman forces marched down south as the winds of war blew towards the gates of Nubia. Well, then comes the one-eyed Queen Amarena of Nubia, who, spoiler alert, comprehensively defeated Augustus Caesar. This no-nonsense Queen Amarena was not interested in bowing to Caesar. Nubians were known for centuries to be master archers. They produced the best warriors of the time and would even fight and rule Egypt in the past, as I had stated earlier. Besides, Nubian hunters and warriors excelled as master spies, and their weapons became a symbol for Nubia for generations. Actually, early Egyptian inscriptions dating 3200 BCE coined Nubia as the land of the bow, or Taset in an ancient Egyptian term, which is used to denote Nubia for thousands of years in antiquity. Now, in 27 BCE, the Kush warriors invaded Roman territories of Thebes, sacking the city, pillaging it, and taking Roman soldiers as prisoners. Imagine a primeval war when trumpeting elephants came against thundering horses. Nubia literally had elephant training camps. Wow, crazy, right? Most remarkably though, under the leadership of Queen Amarena, they shattered the statues of Augustus Caesar, keeping his head as a prize to be buried under the queen's throne as a sign of power. In fact, the head was just discovered the other day. In 1910, the British excavated Augustus Caesar's head in Meroe, the ancient capital of Kush. It currently lies in the British Museum in a bloody 5-year war. A truce was reached between Queen Amarena and Augustus Caesar. Story for another day, I guess. Well, how about the setup of ancient Nubia? You see, the Nubian Kingdom was divided into various city-states, the most notable being Kamak, Napata, and Meroe. These city-states enjoyed prosperity and influence, engaging in vibrant trade networks with neighboring civilizations such as Egypt, Greece, and Rome. The Nubians' wealth was built upon their vast reserves of gold, ivory, and other precious commodities. Well, so what was Sudan like during the peak of the European Dark Ages? Now we have fast-forwarded to 350 to 1500 CE. Now, what we have established right now in Sudan's history does not begin with colonization, right? Let's fast forward to the period referred by Western historians as the medieval period or the Dark Ages. It is mostly agreed that this period lasted between 400 AD or about 300 AD to 1400 AD, while some historians prefer using CE, which means Common Era. By the way, Common Era means like nowadays historians have adopted the use of CE or BCE to ensure religious neutrality. I'm sure you understand that, right? Well, now this period was labeled the Dark Ages because there was little to no advancement in Europe for a whole millennium or thereabout. This period existed between the thriving Roman Empire and the European Renaissance. While Europeans were in the Dark Ages, African empires such as Ghana, Mali, Songhai were at the height of their prosperity. In Asia, the Mongol Empire, which existed between the 13th and 14th centuries, were thriving under the famed Genghis Khan, whose territory stretched as far west as the Caspian Sea. The Caspian Sea is a region between the present-day Russia and Kazakhstan. Similarly, in South America, the Inca and the Moche civilizations were flourishing. You see, as the Nubian Kingdom waned, Sudan experienced a dynamic shift during the medieval period. Influenced by the rise of Islamic civilizations, Arab traders and merchants brought their culture and religion to the region. The spread of Islam created a vibrant fusion of Arab and African cultures, shaping the socio-political landscape of Sudan. During this period, various Islamic states emerged in Sudan, such as the Fungi Sultanate and the Darfur Sultanate. The Fungi Sultanate in particular thrived between the 15th and 16th centuries, and established a prosperous capital in Sena. These Fungi rulers embraced Islam, fostering the growth of Islamic scholarship and contributing to the development of Sudan's architectural heritage. Contrary to what we have been customarily taught, it is evident that Sudan had a civilization beyond colonization. Now, let's explore the history of the Sudan after colonization. Sudan history took an ominous turn with the arrival of the European colonial powers in the 19th century. The scramble for Africa prompted a wave of colonization, and Sudan became a battleground for imperial domination. However, Sudanese resistance movements emerged, bravely defending their land and cultural identity against foreign encroachment. One of the most notable resistant figures was Muhammad Ahmad, who proclaimed himself as Mahdi in 1881. In Islam, the Mahdi is typically a messianic figure in Islamic restoration who is believed to appear at the end of times to rid the world of evil and injustice. Under Muhammad's leadership, Sudanese tribes rallied against the oppressive Egyptian and British forces, seeking to restore their independence. Although the Mahdi's regime was cut short by his death in 1885, his resistance movements paved the way for a unified Sudanese identity and aspiration for self-rule. Well, now let's proceed to the familiar territory, Sudan's independent days. After years of struggle, Sudan finally achieved its independence from Anglo-Egyptian rule on January 1st, 1956. Ismail al-Zahari became the de facto leader of Sudan. The birth of the nation was marked by hope and optimism as Sudan embarked on a path to self-governance. However, this newfound freedom also brought challenges, as Sudan grappled with issues of ethnic diversity, economic instability, and political instability. At the time, the country hosted about 600 ethnic groups, speaking over 400 languages in a country a third the size of the United States. Well, that's divide and conquer for you, man. Like most African countries that struggled with the fallout after colonization, Sudan was not an exception to the dire impacts of imperialism, particularly with the British deliberate policy of divide, conquer, and rule. In fact, we can see neocolonialism propagated right in our eyes. Case in point is the current war in Sudan, where martial leaders are apparent puppets of foreign powers. Needless to say, Sudan faced a series of political upheavals and civil conflicts. Competing factions vied for power, leading to periods of authoritarian rule and economic stability. Now, this brings us to the first and the second Sudan's civil war. Let's see. The Sudan's first civil war, also known as Anyanya Rebellion, was a protracted armed conflict that took place in the newly established country from 1955 to 1972. On August 8th of 1955, a mutiny broke out in Torit, leading to eruption of violence and the formation of Anyanya Rebel movement. The rebels sought greater autonomy and cultural recognition for the southern regions. While in this case, Sudan was still one nation, you understand? So South Sudan had not seceded at the time. This first civil war ended with the 1972 Addis Ababa Agreement between SPLM, which is the Sudan People Liberation Movement, and the GOS, which is the government of Sudan, which granted significant regional autonomy to southern Sudan on internal issues. SPLM was soon joined by the Sudanese Liberation Army led by Colonel John Garang de Mabur. The conflict was primarily fought between the Central Sudanese government in Sudan, which was predominantly Islam, and the marginalized southern regions, particularly the predominantly Christian and animist population. The roots of the Sudan First Civil Wars can be traced to the colonial era, when the British adopted a policy of divide and rule, exacerbating ethnic, religious, and regional tensions. These divisions persisted after independence, as the government in Khartoum was dominated by northern Arab Muslims, while the southern regions felt marginalized and neglected in terms of political representation, economic development, and cultural recognition. The civil war was characterized by sporadic fighting, guerrilla warfare, and government suppression. The Sudanese government responded with brute force, carrying out indiscriminate bombings, displacement campaigns, and scorched earth tactics in the south. After many years of violence, a peace agreement known as the Addis Ababa Agreement was signed on March 27, 1972. The agreement granted the southern regions limited autonomy, cultural and political rights, and a share for national resources. It also established a regional government known as the Southern Sudan Autonomous Region. Although the Addis Agreement brought a temporary end to the conflict, the underlying issues of political marginalization, economic disparities, and cultural grievances were not fully addressed. These unresolved tensions would eventually lead to the outbreak of the Second Sudanese Civil War in 1983, which lasted until 2005. So, what about the Second Sudanese Civil War? The Second Civil War erupted in 1983 when President Jafar Nimeiri introduced Sharia law and reneged on the Addis Ababa Agreement provisions for a referendum in Abyei. Abyei, by the way, is an oil-rich region located on the current border of North and South Sudan. By the 1980s, the Muslim Brotherhood, a religious political organization active in the Middle East and North Africa, and other Islamic factions had successfully taken root in the military, the civil service, and the ranks of secondary school teachers. The SPLM, I told you earlier, it's called the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, fought against GOS, which is the government of Sudan, until 1989, when the parties reached an agreement and suspended Sharia law. Well, here comes General Omar Hassan al-Hamad al-Bashir, who seized power in 1989. Remembering these guys, you remember we talked about him, yeah? Al-Bashir, a military officer, seized power through a coup d'etat, establishing an Islamist regime. For sure, Omar al-Bashir's autocratic rule deserves a whole episode on its own. You see, Bashir led the Revolutionary Command Council for National Salvation, in short RCC. Unable to defeat the SPLA on the field battle, the government armed and unleashed an Arab militia against their traditional African rivals, principally the Dinka. You might know the Dinka as the tall, dark Sudanese people you're accustomed to seeing on various social media networks. Then this was complicated by a fierce infighting among the rebel forces in the early 1990s, in part because of the challenges to Garang's leadership. On the one hand, Colonel Garang advocated for a secular state where every citizen received equal development opportunities. On the other hand, Riek Machar, Garang's adversary, preferred championing for a completely independent Sudan. Let's fast forward to 2005. The civil war was finally coming to the end when the SPLA and the government of Sudan signed the Comprehensive Peace Agreement (CPA) on January the 9th of 2005, mediated by the Intergovernmental Authority on Development (IGAD), which is a regional body within the Horn of Africa. It is worth noting that the government of Kenya, under the leadership of the late President Mwai Kibaki, was instrumental in helping negotiate the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. If you read the CPA carefully, some of the components include the Machakos Protocol of 2002, the September 2003 Naivasha Security Agreement, and the Naivasha Power Sharing Agreement of May 2004. Following Garang's mysterious death in a helicopter crash in 2005, President Salva Kiir succeeded him. South Sudan proclaimed its independence on July the 9th of 2011, and the declaration was greeted with widespread international recognition. By the time the Second Civil War ended in 2005, between 2.5 million and 3 people were killed and over 4 million displaced. As we come to a close, let's briefly explore al-Bashir's regime. Al-Bashir's regime was characterized by an autocratic rule, characterized by economic mismanagement, widespread human rights abuses. If you can remember, the al-Bashir was indicted by the ICC, but right now he's still in house arrest. Under his tyrannical rule, Sudan experienced armed conflicts in regions such as Darfur, South Kordofan, Blue Nile, and this led to immense suffering and loss of life. During al-Bashir's tenure, Sudan faced international isolation and economic sanctions due to allegations of supporting terrorism and committing war crimes. The country's economy deteriorated, with inflation soaring and basic services crumbling. The government's oppressive measures and crackdown on dissent further fueled internal discontent and resistance. At the height of his dictatorial rule, Bashir had committed mass murder, extermination, torture, and pillaging in magnitudes never seen before in the Horn of Africa. Sudan's bloodiest regime, which lasted for 3 decades, ended with ousting of al-Bashir through a coup d'etat plotted by his former proteges, Al-Burhan and Dagalo. Basically, he came to power through a military coup and was ousted by one. To end with Sudan's current conflict. So what is really happening in Sudan, and what's the warring party's agenda? How did Dagalo and Al-Burhan come to capture Sudanese politics in this manner? More so, how did he come to eclipse his master Al-Bashir? To begin with, a brief history of the warring generals. You see, Dagalo was born in 1974 into the Maharia tribe of the Rizeigat community in Darfur. Pardon my pronunciation, guys. Until the 2019 revolution, Dagalo was a shadowy background militiaman serving as al-Bashir foot soldier in the restive west side of Sudan, which is the Darfur. For those 2 tense years, the two generals shared a power with the civilian parties, that is 2020 and 2021. The transitional government, however, was forcefully removed and Dagalo became vice president right under Al-Burhan. Initially, Dagalo owns actually immense valuable gold mines, which was seized in 2017 with al-Bashir's blessings. He also runs the largest paramilitary group private army in Africa, a force with a whopping 70,000 soldiers. Despite Sudan being the 3rd largest producer of gold in Africa, these funds barely benefit its people. Over the years, Dagalo has forged powerful ties both in the region and internationally. He even sent the RSF forces to fight Iran-aligned Houthi rebels in Yemen, allying with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. So what about his opposite number, Al-Burhan? Al-Burhan is the de facto leader of the Sudanese army. Born in 1960 in a village north of Khartoum, the mustached general, known for his signature green beret and military uniform, renamed relatively known for his career. Burhan commanded the country's ground forces before Bashir made him Inspector General of the Army in February 2019, 2 months later before the military removed Bashir from power. So what happened that fueled the current conflict? On a fateful day in March 2003, a protester in Khartoum was fatally shot at close quarters by an army officer, with 100 or more similar cases occurring during the combined military and paramilitary junta. This instigated the April unrest. On the morning of the April 15th, the RSF under Dagalo's leadership had already taken the Meroe airport. While it's unclear who initiated the fighting, the initial situation brings the de facto leader of Sudan, the ASF General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, into direct confrontation with his deputy, the RSF General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. General Burhan and Dagalo have both faced calls from civilian leaders and victims of the conflict in Darfur and elsewhere to face trials for alleged abuses. The stakes are extremely high. There's plenty of reasons for their former allies turned bitter enemies not to back down. We hope that a ceasefire agreement is reached as soon as possible so that the people of Sudan can go back to those peaceful days. Finally, let's explore some of the foreign powers' interests in the region. At its core, this is another proxy war benefiting the economic and political interests of Washington, Cairo, Beijing, Moscow, Riyadh, and their allies in the strive to outdo each other in global politics at the expense of the Sudanese people. Take, for instance, the Wagner Group. This is a Russian paramilitary enterprise that routinely advances Moscow's political, military, and economic goals. They were deployed in Sudan in December of 2017 to provide military and political support to the then President Omar al-Bashir. They now support the RSF and apparently benefits from the cheap gold distributed by Dagalo. Meanwhile, in late 2020, Moscow and Khartoum reached an agreement to establish a Russian naval base at the port of Sudan. The Egyptian government also supports al-Burhan because of its Nile River interests, following the construction of Ethiopia's Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which risks holding much of the water that flows through the Nile Valley, which sustains 90% of the Egyptian population. On the other side of the coin is the United States masquerading as a peacekeeper. As you might know, the United Nations might look independent from outside, but it's largely a branch of the US government. Keep in mind that thousands of Americans are stationed at the Camp Lenomé in the Horn of Africa. Another noteworthy point is that Sudan's eruption into conflict has left international consumer good markets racing to show up supplies of gum arabic, one of the country's most sought-after products and a key ingredient in everything from fizzy drinks to candy and cosmetic. Case in point is PepsiCo and Coca-Cola, American-owned multinationals. Notably, about 70% of the world's supply of gum arabica comes from Sudan. In December 2019, President Trump invited al-Burhan to Washington. Al-Burhan then met the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu in Uganda. More evidence of Western meddling, of course. I challenge you to look at the facts and make a judgment on which power supports whom in this seemingly unending civil war. Well, in concluding this very long episode, Sudan's rich history from the ancient Nubian Kingdom to the present day is a testament of resilience and determination of its people. As Sudan navigates its path towards stability, peace, and prosperity, it is essential for the international community to support the country's endeavor and promote inclusive dialogue and reconciliation. The current conflict in 2023 underscores the urgent need for international cooperation. Feel free to add your comments and areas of improvement. If you have followed to this end, then you are unquestionably a history buff. The burning question is, however, what other interests do foreign powers have in Sudan? What should regional powers such as Ethiopia, Kenya, and Egypt do to stabilize the Horn of Africa? Please learn, like, subscribe, and share. Don't forget to tune in for our next episode as we head to West Africa, where we explore the bittersweet history of the beloved Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana. I'm all out, guys. Asante na kwaheri.